Happy Friday. How's everyone doing tonight? Probably everyone's not here yet. Let's see where we're at. I see Farmhouse. I see only Farmhouse. Friday night, 7 o'clock. Just you. I'm sure people will start showing up over the next 10 minutes or so. Let's let that happen. Look, it's a puppy. Look at this little guy. Yeah, oh, there he is. Woo. Hi, puppy. You want a treat? Oh, good boy. I can see his reflection. Too spooky. It is? Oh. Go meet the people. I didn't post on Facebook this time. I kind of didn't want to be pestering everybody every time I was going to stream here, but I wonder if some people need the reminder there or something. Maybe I should set up a separate page just for this. Oh, there goes the notification or something. Oh, here's my time. Aha. Oh, hello, Sharkies. Good evening. Happy Friday. How are you all doing tonight? There's always a little bit of a delay between what I'm saying here and by the time it actually reaches the stream, so sometimes I see something, react to it, and then it's kind of like, and now we wait for it to happen. Pooped, long week, long Friday. I've had a busy week myself. This is 1 week since we did the first one of these. This would be the fourth. We did one last Friday, and then Monday and Wednesday and today. So this is number 4, I guess. Or did I do one on, is this the 4th or the 5th? Did we do one? Oh no, I've posted 4 of them, so this would be the 5th. I guess we started not last Friday, but last Wednesday. I missed the 1 week anniversary. Hello, Chronically Snail. Is Chronically Snail someone I know? Chronically Snail has a Prime Gaming crown. Oh, hey. Hey, Cypress. How are you doing? Glad you could make it. I know you were here for at least one other one, or at least that's what Dan was saying. I don't know if you've caught any of the others, but we've been making our way through this. We're, I think, partway through chapter 5 right now. The lovely cover art. Yeah. So, where are we? Uh, in the book, we had just gotten through the actual riddles section of the chapter, Riddles in the Dark, which is a very fun chapter, but also very creepy. Some discussion about how difficult it might be to think of the answers to riddles and think of new riddles when someone's threatening to eat you when you fail. And there's a puppy over here behind me. Let's bring him. Up. Oh. You want to come up? No, he doesn't want to come up. He doesn't really like me sitting here. I think he thinks it's all kind of strange. Binnabick! Binnabick. Hey, puppy. Lots of treats for puppy so he can get used to this. You want to come up? No? Okay, here. You don't have to jump up. You want another? Yeah, he's camera shy, that's right. Not too camera shy. He doesn't mind being in the background, it seems. Oh, Xentite. You get some dust in your nose? How's the sound tonight? Can everybody hear me just fine? So one thing that we didn't actually talk about last time, even though it came up for the first time, is the glowing swords. The swords from Gondolin. There are, what, 3 of them now, and I guess they all glow around goblins. Okay, good. Sounds like I'm coming through all right. So the swords are an interesting thing. And I wonder whether the glowing is just to frighten goblins or if there's any other effect to it. I don't know if it's ever really been mentioned that they do anything beyond glow around goblins. Like, does the glowing imply there's some sort of magical damage that they're doing? Do they cut goblins better than normal, or is it just an intimidation thing? They glow to let you know that there's goblins nearby and to let the goblins know to be afraid. I kind of wonder about that. Has anyone seen anything anywhere that talks about that? Even Bilbo's little dagger, which he has not yet named. An early warning system, yeah. I mean, it is an effective thing to have. It's good to know when there's goblins nearby, especially since, as we found out, they can be very sneaky when they want to be with their very quiet shoes and they're creeping around in the dark. So, if you have a sword that starts letting off light, I guess the only problem is if it's in its sheath, you might not notice. Have the Sharkies read any further ahead? Gotten further than Riddles in the Dark? It's 10 past now. Do we have anyone else here that's showed up? I think we'll get started on reading it. So we are still partway through Riddles in the Dark, but I think we're getting close to the end of that chapter. You reach the next chapter, but not too far in. Okay. So we might catch up to you then. So let's see. When we left off, Gollum was screaming about having lost something, and Bilbo was feeling quite unnerved about that and was trying to find out what it was exactly that Gollum had lost. Every time I lean forward, my tie gets all out of place. And Gollum, having discovered that he had lost his precious, was becoming very suspicious of Bilbo and suspecting that maybe what Bilbo had got in his pockets was the certain something that Gollum had lost. So let's just go to the beginning of the previous chapter. "What have you lost?" Bilbo persisted. But now the light in Gollum's eyes had become a green fire, and it was coming swiftly nearer. Gollum was in his boat again, paddling wildly back to the dark shore, and such a rage of loss and suspicion was in his heart that no sword had any more terror for him. Bilbo could not guess what had maddened the wretched creature, but he saw that all was up, and that Gollum meant to murder him at any rate. Just in time, he turned and ran blindly back up the dark passage down which he had come, keeping close to the wall and feeling it with his left hand. "What has it got in its pocketses?" he heard the hiss loud behind him, and the splash as Gollum leapt from the boat. "What have I wonder?" he said to himself, as he panted and stumbled along. He put his left hand in his pocket. The ring felt very cold as it quietly slipped on to his groping forefinger. The hiss was close behind him. He turned now and saw Gollum's eyes like small green lamps coming up the slope. Terrified, he tried to run faster, but suddenly he struck his toes on a snag in the floor and fell flat with his little sword under him. It's dangerous. In a moment, Gollum was on him. But before Bilbo could do anything, recover his breath, pick himself up, or wave his sword, Gollum passed by, taking no notice of him, cursing and whispering as he ran. What could it mean? Gollum could see in the dark. Bilbo could see the light of his eyes palely shining even from behind. Painfully he got up and sheathed his sword, which was now glowing faintly again. Then very cautiously he followed. There seemed nothing else to do. It was no good crawling back down to Gollum's water. Perhaps if he followed him, Gollum might lead him to some way of escape without meaning to. "Curse it! Curse it! Curse it!" hissed Gollum. "Curse the Baggins! It's gone! What has it got in its pocketses? Oh, we guess, my precious. He's found it, yes, he must have. My birthday present." Bilbo pricked up his ears. He was at last beginning to guess himself. He hurried a little, getting as close as he dared behind Gollum, who was still going quickly, not looking back, but turning his head from side to side, as Bilbo could see the faint glimmer on the walls. "My birthday present! Curse it! How did we lose it, my precious? Yes, that's it! Curse it! It's slipped from us after all these ages and ages. It's gone, Gollum!" Suddenly, Gollum sat down and began to weep, a whistling and gurgling sound horrible to listen to. Bilbo halted and flattened himself against the tunnel wall. After a while, Gollum stopped weeping and began to talk. He seemed to be having an argument with himself. "It's no good going back there to search. No, we doesn't remember all the places we've visited. And it's no use. The Baggins has got it in its pocketses. The nasty noser has found it, we says." "We guesses, precious, only guesses. We can't know till we find the nasty creature and squeezes it. But it doesn't know what the present can do, does it? It'll just keep it in its pocketses. It doesn't know, and it can't go far. It's lost itself, the nasty, nosy thing. It doesn't know the way out. It said so. It said so, yes, but it's tricksy. It doesn't say what it means. It won't say what it's got in its pocketses. It knows. It knows a way in. It must know a way out, yes. It's off to the back door. To the back door, that's it. The goblinses will catch it then. It can't get out that way, precious. Gollum! Goblinses! Yes, but if it's got the present, our precious present, then goblinses will get it, Gollum. They'll find it. They'll find out what it does. We shan't ever be safe again, never, Gollum. One of the goblinses will put it on, and then no one will see him. He'll be there, but not seen. Not even our clever eyes will notice him, and he'll come creepsy and tricksy and catch us. Gollum! Gollum! Then let's stop talking, precious, and make haste. If the Baggins has gone that way, we must go quick and see. Go! Not far now, make haste! With a spring, Gollum got up and started shambling off at a great pace. Bilbo hurried after him, still cautiously, though his chief fear now was of tripping on another snag and falling with a noise. His head was in a whirl of hope and wonder. It seemed that the ring he had was a magic ring. It made you invisible. He had heard of such things, of course, in old tales, but it was hard to believe that he really had found one, by accident. Still, there it was. Gollum with his bright eyes had passed him by, only a yard to one side. On they went, Gollum flip-flapping ahead, hissing and cursing, Bilbo behind going as softly as a hobbit can. Soon they came to places where, as Bilbo had noticed on the way down, side passages opened, this way and that. Gollum began at once to count them. 1 left, yes. 1 right, yes. 2 right, yes, yes. 2 left, yes, yes. And so on and on. As the count grew, he slowed down, and he began to get shaky and weepy, for he was leaving the water further and further behind, and he was getting afraid. Goblins might be about, and he had lost his ring. At last he stopped by a low opening on their left as they went up. 7 right, yes. 6 left, yes, he whispered. This is it. This is the way to the back door, yes. Here's the passage. He peered in and shrank back. But we durstn't go in, precious. No, we durstn't. Goblinses down there. Lots of goblinses. We smells them. Sss. What shall we do? Curse them and crush them. We must wait here, precious. Wait a bit and see. So they came to a dead stop. Gollum had brought Bilbo to the way out after all, but Bilbo could not get in. There was Gollum, sitting humped up right in the opening, and his eyes gleamed cold in his head as he swayed it from side to side between his knees. Bilbo crept away from the wall more quietly than a mouse, but Gollum stiffened at once, and sniffed, and his eyes went green. He hissed, softly but menacingly. He could not see the hobbit, but now he was on the alert, and he had other senses that the darkness had sharpened, hearing and smell. He seemed to be crouched right down with his flat hands splayed on the floor, and his head thrust out, nose almost to the stone. Though he was only a black shadow in the gleam of his own eyes, Bilbo could see or feel that he was tense as a bowstring, gathered for a spring. Running with sharp objects. Has a short sword shaped bruise. Yeah. Bilbo almost stopped breathing and went stiff himself. He was desperate. He must get away, out of this horrible darkness while he had any strength left. He must fight. He must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out, kill it. It meant to kill him. No, not a fair fight. He was invisible now. Gollum had no sword. Gollum had not actually threatened to kill him, or tried to yet, and he was miserable, alone, lost. A sudden understanding, a pity mixed with horror, welled up in Bilbo's heart. A glimpse of endless, unmarked days, without light or hope of betterment. Hard stone, cold fish, sneaking and whispering. All these thoughts passed in a flash of a second. He trembled, and then quite suddenly, in another flash, as if lifted by a new strength and resolve, he leapt. No great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark. Straight over Gollum's head he jumped, 7 feet forward and 3 in the air. Indeed, had he known it, he had only just missed cracking his skull on the low arch of the passage. Gollum threw himself backwards, and grabbed as the hobbit flew over him, but too late. His hand snapped on thin air, and Bilbo, falling fair on his sturdy feet, sped off down the new tunnel. He did not turn to see what Gollum was doing. There was a hissing and a cursing, almost at his heels at first. Then it stopped. All at once there came a blood-curdling shriek, filled with hatred and despair. Gollum was defeated. He dared go no further. He had lost his prey, and lost, too, the only thing he had ever cared for, his precious. The cry brought Bilbo's heart to his mouth, but still he held on. Now faint as an echo, but menacing, the voice came behind. "Thief! Thief! Thief! Baggins! We hates it! We hates it! We hates it forever!" Then there was a silence, but that too seemed menacing to Bilbo. If goblins are so near that he smelt them, he thought, then they'll have heard his shrieking and cursing. Careful now, or this way will lead you to worse things. The passage was low and roughly made. It was not too difficult for the hobbit, except when, in spite of all care, he stubbed his poor toes again, several times, on nasty jagged stones in the floor. A bit low for goblins, at least for the big ones, thought Bilbo, not knowing that even the big ones, the orcs of the mountain, go along at great speed, stooping low with their hands almost on the ground. So there we have, the big ones are orcs of the mountain. Soon the passage that had been sloping down began to go up again, and after a while it climbed steeply. That slowed Bilbo down, but at last the slope stopped. The passage turned a corner and dipped down again, and there, at the bottom of a short incline, he saw, filtering round another corner, a glimpse of light. Not red light, as of fire or lantern, but a pale out-of-doors sort of light. Then Bilbo began to run. Scuttling as fast as his legs would carry him, he turned the last corner and came suddenly right into an open space, where the light, after all that time in the dark, seemed dazzlingly bright. Really, it was only a leak of sunshine in through a doorway, where a great door, a stone door, was left standing open. Bilbo blinked, and then suddenly he saw the goblins in full armor with drawn swords, sitting just inside the door and watching it with wide eyes, and watching the passage that led to it. They were aroused, alert, ready for anything. They saw him sooner than he saw them. Yes, they saw him. Whether it was an accident or a last trick of the ring before it took a new master, it was not on his finger. With yells of delight, the goblins rushed upon him. A pang of fear and loss, like an echo of Gollum's misery, smote Bilbo, and forgetting even to draw his sword, he stuck his hands into his pockets. And there was the ring still in his left pocket, and it slipped on his finger. The goblins stopped short. They could not see a sign of him. He had vanished. They yelled twice as loud as before, but not so delightedly. "Where is it?" they cried. "Go back up the passage," some shouted. "This way," some yelled. "That way," others yelled. "Look out for the door!" bellowed the captain. Whistles blew, armor clashed, swords rattled, goblins cursed and swore and ran hither and thither, falling over one another and getting very angry. There was a terrible outcry, to-do, and disturbance. Bilbo was dreadfully frightened, but he had the sense to understand what had happened and to sneak behind a big barrel which held drink for the goblin guards, and so get out of the way and avoid being bumped into, trampled to death, or caught by feel. "I must get to the door! I must get to the door!" he kept saying to himself, but it was a long time before he ventured to try. Then it was like a horrible game of blind man's bluff. The place was full of goblins running about, and the poor little hobbit dodged this way and that, was knocked over by a goblin who could not make out what he had bumped into, scrambled away on all fours, slipped between the legs of the captain just in time, got up, and ran for the door. It was still ajar, but a goblin had pushed it nearly to. Bilbo struggled, but he could not move it. He tried to squeeze through the crack. He squeezed, and he stuck. It was awful. His buttons had got wedged on the edge of the door and the door post. He could see outside into the open air. There were a few steps running down into a narrow valley between tall mountains. The sun came out from behind a cloud and shone bright on the outside of the door, but he could not get through. Suddenly, one of the goblins inside shouted, "There is a shadow by the door! Something is outside!" Bilbo's heart jumped into his mouth. He gave a terrific squirm. Buttons burst off in all directions. He was through, with a torn coat and waistcoat, leaping down the steps like a goat, while bewildered goblins were still picking up his nice brass buttons on the doorstep. Of course, they soon came down after him, hooting and hallooing, and hunting among the trees. But they don't like the sun. It makes their legs wobble and their heads giddy. They could not find Bilbo with the ring on, slipping in and out of the shadow of the trees, running quick and quiet, and keeping out of the sun. So soon they went back, grumbling and cursing, to guard the door. Bilbo had escaped. That's the end of chapter 5. That's a long chapter. A lot happened there. Bilbo's poor buttons, gathered up by goblins. And of course the poor ponies that I don't think we'll ever see again. A lot of action, yeah. I think we should all just pretend that the goblins sold the ponies off to some other travelers, that some merchants or something, and the ponies went on to live a happy life. And, I don't know, live on a farm. That's what you say, right? Happy ponies on a farm. Or they escaped. Yeah, with all the panic that was caused when Gandalf attacked and killed the Goblin King, the ponies escaped. Thinking of what goblin hooting sounds like. I don't know if that would be a very funny sound. I think it'd be pretty scary, especially if they're chasing you down a mountainside. Imagine one sounding like Don Knotts. I'm not even going to try to pretend to do that one. So a lot happened in there, and Bilbo has found out what the ring that he found does, and did discover that it belonged to Gollum originally. It's interesting that there's maybe a small trace of it having an effect on Bilbo, like when it slipped off his finger for the first time, he felt that sudden feeling of loss. But that's just about the extent of it, and I don't know that there's much more. No, I'm not gonna try and do that impression. But yeah, I don't know that there's much mention of any other effects in this book of the of the ring, beyond it making him invisible. It's also interesting that it you're invisible, you can't be seen, but if you're in direct sunlight, they can see your shadow. I don't know how much more often that little detail comes up. Um, but it did actually matter in this chapter that the goblins could see his shadow in the doorway. They just thought he was someone else outside, I guess. And poor, angry, hateful Gollum, alone in the dark without his ring. Well, I'm sure that's the last we'll ever hear of him. That's it. Gone back to live the rest of his life in his lake, eating fish and the occasional goblin, right? Uh, and yeah, there was the first, I think, in-book usage of the word orc. They mentioned it at the beginning of the book. They said that orc is usually translated goblin, and orc is the Hobbit's form of the name given at that time to these creatures. So, another thing that is like not to be mistaken is that any mention of orc in this book is not at all the same as the Orcai in Lord of the Rings, because the Orcai are kind of a horrible experimental hybrid creature, I believe. Found it interesting that there's the first hint of the ring having negative intentions, that it might have had a last trick to not be on Bilbo's finger. Yeah, I think that's probably. I don't remember if they imply that it escaped from Gollum, but there's definitely that idea there that the ring is not benevolent, or even just an object, that the ring might have some kind of malevolent intentions. Yeah, some kind of will. And there was, I think, one mention of the Master of the Ring, that even the Master of the Ring couldn't see you, or something like that. Let me see if I can find that, because that is an interesting thought this early on. Let's see, they said that it was a ring of power. Here it is. Who knows how Gollum came by the present ages ago in the old days when such rings were still at large in the world? Perhaps even the Master who ruled them all could not have said. And the word master is capitalized there. So that's also an interesting thing. There's the implication of more than one ring at this point, because it says when such rings were still at large, and that there is a master who ruled them all. That could not have said how Gollum came upon it. And there's also some other mentions here of the effects of the ring, because it says Gollum used to wear it at first till it tired him, then he kept it in a pouch next to its skin till it galled him, and now usually he hid it in a hole in the rock on his island and was always going back to look at it, and still sometimes he put it on when he could not bear to be parted from it any longer, or when he was very, very hungry and tired of fish. So there's definitely like it's saying here, that over time it becomes more and more difficult to be in contact with the ring, or at least it did for Gollum. So there's a few details here. I think this is probably the most we get in this book of the details, but there are still a few details here that are intriguing, that because this book it feels so early, right? It's his first published work. It's Tolkien's first published work. But it's interesting that you can tell even now these ideas were at least starting to form. If he didn't have them fully fleshed out, I don't know where his planning for Middle-earth was at this point when he wrote this. But at the very least, it was starting to form. What would happen what if someone found a different ring of power? Well, we know a little bit about what happens if you wear other rings of power. It tends to not be very good for you. because we meet some of the wearers of other rings in later books. Um, Somewhat early on in The Lord of the Rings, there's some other wearers of the different rings, I believe. Because if I'm not mistaken, that's what the Nazgul are. Um, I mean, we can see here that even this ring has a bad effect on Gollum, but it's not so bad as the other ones, I believe. Because well, yes, that's true too, and it is spoken of that hobbits, being quite sturdy and resistant little creatures, maybe they're not like the greatest warriors, but it's easier for them to resist the effects of the ring. But I believe the other rings of power were more created in order to be traps. This is a little bit spoilery for later books, but I don't know, it's part of a discussion. Um, Pretty much nothing about the dwarven ones. Yeah, that's true. It's also interesting how there were different numbers of different rings that were created for the different peoples. But, yes, my understanding of the other rings was they were created as gifts, but they were more like traps. They were magical traps that were meant to ensnare the people that wore them. So I think that if you were to put on one of the other rings, it would not end very well for you. The 9 were for humans or equivalent. We know about the elves, but yeah, you're about to mention dwarves. Well, and I don't know how canonical it is. I think it was at least somewhat supposed to be canonical, but there were some games, these Shadow of Mordor games. I don't know why I did air quotes there. I'll just keep doing this. Anyways, there were these Shadow of Mordor games. And one of the characters in that was an elven smith that was tricked into working on, I think, the rings. So that was an interesting detail in those. Yeah, so I'll show you the artwork for Chapter 6. Give it a moment. There it is. Out of the frying pan into the fire. A nasty looking beastie there. Not exactly a wolf. I like its different eyes. And those are some shiny looking teeth. There's probably room for Dwarves and the Rings fan fiction. C.S. Lewis endorsed fan fiction of Narnia? Yeah, I like this next part as well. I would be surprised if Tolkien was against fan fiction. I mean, his books were kind of an instant success, and I'm pretty sure he received lots and lots of fan letters. I don't know. It would be something to read up on to see if there's any record of that, of Tolkien being sent any fan fiction. I do enjoy the Narnia books. They're strange. I find them very strange at parts. Get letters from fans to write more, but he told them if people wanted more, they could write some for themselves. That's nice. That's a good response. I like authors that are willing to share their world with others. Yeah, I think it's a good way of approaching it and of encouraging other people. So yeah, Chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire. Should we read a little bit of that? Let's once again count the pages. Hello, Robot Kyo? Yes. Yeah, all about cooking, that's right. A very relaxing chapter about cooking. So let's see, it goes from page 117 to 141. That's definitely a longer chapter. So maybe we should read a little bit of it so that next time we don't have to read the entirety of it at once. Maybe we'll read less than half of it this time. The next time we'll finish it, and then we can try and get back to just solid chapters instead of doing half of one chapter and half of another. The title refers to marshmallows or a ruined steak. Yeah. Yeah, you generally don't want your food to go out of the frying pan into the fire. I guess that's not the most positive experience. Also, who cooks marshmallows in a frying pan? What are you talking about? That doesn't make sense. A horror experience for a hobbit. Oh, yeah, the puppy got the remains of the... Well, let's find out if the puppy gets the remains of a dinner. I'm kind of getting the feeling that if that were the case, it might not be a very pleasant experience. So we'll read... Let's see. We'll just read a few pages of it, I think. We'll read up to page 124, roughly. All right, chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan, Into the Fire. Let's find out if it's about steaks or what. Bilbo had escaped the goblins, but he did not know where he was. He had lost hood, cloak, food, pony, his buttons, and his friends. He wandered on and on, till the sun began to sink westwards, behind the mountains. Their shadows fell across Bilbo's path, and he looked back. Then he looked forward, and he could see before him only ridges and slopes falling towards lowlands and plains, glimpsed occasionally between the trees. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "I seem to have got right to the other side of the misty mountains, right to the edge of the land beyond. Where, and oh where, can Gandalf and the dwarves have got to? I only hope to goodness they're not still back there in the power of the goblins." He still wandered on, out of the little high valley, over its edge, and down the slopes beyond, but all the while a very uncomfortable thought was growing inside him. He wondered whether he ought not, now he had the magic ring, to go back into the horrible, horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty, that he must turn back, and very miserable he felt about it, when he heard voices. He stopped and listened. It did not sound like goblins, so he crept forward carefully. He was on a stony path, winding downwards with a rocky wall on his left hand. On the other side the ground sloped away, and there were dells below the level of the path, overhung with bushes and low trees. In one of these dells, under the bushes, people were talking. He crept still nearer, and suddenly he saw peering between two big boulders a head with a red hood on it. It was Balin, doing lookout. He could have clapped and shouted for joy, but he did not. He had still got the ring on, for fear of meeting something unexpected and unpleasant, and he saw that Balin was looking straight at him without noticing him. I will give them all a surprise," he thought, as he crawled into the bushes at the edge of the dell. Gandalf was arguing with the dwarves. They were discussing all that had happened to them in the tunnels, and wondering and debating what they were to do now. The dwarves were grumbling, and Gandalf was saying that they could not possibly go on with their journey, leaving Mr. Baggins in the hands of the goblins, without trying to find out if he was alive or dead, and without trying to rescue him. "After all, he is my friend," said the wizard, "and not a bad little chap. I feel responsible for him. I wish to goodness you had not lost him." The dwarves wanted to know why he had ever been brought at all, why he could not stick to his friends and come along with them, and why the wizard had not chosen someone with more sense. "He has been more trouble than use so far," said one. "If we have got to go back now into those abominable tunnels to look for them, then drat him, I say." Gandalf answered angrily, "I brought him, and I don't bring things that are of no use. Either you help me to look for him, or I go and leave you here to get out of the mess as best you can yourselves. If we can only find him again, you will thank me before all is over. Whatever did you want to go and drop him for, Dory?" "You would have dropped him," said Dory, "if a goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs from behind in the dark, tripped up your feet, and kicked you in the back." "Then why didn't you pick him up again?" "Good heavens! Can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark, everybody falling over bodies and hitting one another. You nearly chopped my head off with Glamdring, and Thorin was stabbing here and there and everywhere with Orcrist. All of a sudden you gave one of your blinding flashes, and we saw the goblins running back yelping. You shouted, 'Follow me, everybody,' and everybody ought to have followed. We thought everybody had. There was no time to count, as you know quite well, till we had dashed through the gate guards, out of the lower door, and helter-skelter down here. And here we are, without the burglar, confusticate him." "And here's the burglar," said Bilbo, stepping down into the middle of them and slipping off the ring. Bless me, how they jumped! Then they shouted with surprise and delight. Gandalf was as astonished as any of them, but probably more pleased than all the others. He called to Balin and told him what he thought of a lookout man who let people walk right into them like that without warning. It is a fact that Bilbo's reputation went up a very great deal with the dwarves after this. If they had still doubted that he was really a first-class burglar, in spite of Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. Balin was the most puzzled of all, but everyone said it was a very clever bit of work. Indeed, Bilbo was so pleased with their praise that he just chuckled inside and said nothing whatever about the ring. And when they asked him how he did it, he said, "Oh, just crept along, you know, very carefully and quietly." "Well, it is the first time that even a mouse has crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose and not been spotted," said Balin, "and I take my hood off to you," which he did. "Balin, at your service," said he. "Your servant, Mr. Baggins," said Bilbo. Then they wanted to know all about his adventures after they had lost him, and he sat down and told them everything, except about the finding of the ring. Not just now, he thought. They were particularly interested in the riddle competition, and shuddered most appreciatively at his description of Gollum. "And then I couldn't think of any other questions with him sitting beside me," ended Bilbo, "so I said, 'What's in my pocket?' And he couldn't guess in 3 goes, so I said, 'What about your promise? Show me the way out.' But he came at me to kill me, and I ran and fell over, and he missed me in the dark. Then I followed him because I heard him talking to himself. He thought I really knew the way out, and so he was making for it. And then he sat down in the entrance, and I could not get by. So I jumped over him and escaped, and ran down to the gate." "What about the guards?" they asked. "Weren't there any?" "Oh, yes, lots of them. But I dodged 'em. I got stuck in the door, which was only open a crack, and I lost lots of buttons," he said, sadly looking at his torn clothes. "But I squeezed through all right, and here I am." The dwarves looked at him with quite a new respect when he talked about dodging guards, jumping over Gollum, and squeezing through, as if it was not very difficult or very alarming. "What did I tell you?" said Gandalf, laughing. "Mr. Baggins has more about him than you guess." He gave Bilbo a queer look from under his busy eyebrows as he said this, and the hobbit wondered if he guessed at the part of his tale that he had left out. Then he had questions of his own to ask, for if Gandalf had explained it all by now to the dwarves, Bilbo had not heard it. He wanted to know how the wizard had turned up again, and where they had all got to now. Oh, hey, Izzy's here. Hey, Izzy, good to see you. All right, everybody's starting to show up. I think Erica was not going to be here last Friday because she thought they had guests over, and then it turned out that that wasn't going to be last Friday. It was going to be this Friday. So I'm guessing that's where Erica has gotten to. Should have used the buddy system. Well, you missed it. They did try to use the buddy system, but Bilbo got knocked off of his buddy and then bumped his head, and everybody ran off as they were getting chased by goblins, so the buddy system kind of fell apart. They've got them over today? Yeah, that makes sense. We're just going a few more pages, and then we're going to call it for tonight. But I will put this video up if you want to catch up on anything you've missed. Alright. The wizard, to tell the truth, never minded explaining his cleverness more than once. So now he told Bilbo that both he and Elrond had been well aware of the presence of evil goblins in that part of the mountains. They knew that, did they? But their main gate used to come out on a different pass, one more easy to travel by, so that they often caught people benighted near their gates. Evidently, people had given up going that way, and the goblins must have opened their new entrance at the top of the pass the dwarves had taken quite recently, because it had been quite safe up to now. And I guess that makes sense. I must see if I can't find a more or less decent giant to block it up again, said Gandalf, or soon there will be no getting over the mountains at all. As soon as Gandalf had heard Bilbo's yell, he realized what had happened. In the flash which had killed the goblins that were grabbing him, he had nipped inside the crack, just as it snapped to. He followed after the drivers and prisoners right to the edge of the great hall, and there he sat down and worked up the best magic he could in the shadows. A very ticklish business it was, he said. Touch and go. But of course, Gandalf had made a special study of bewitchments with fire and lights. Even the Hobbit had never forgotten the magic fireworks at Old Took's Midsummer Eve parties, as you remember. The rest we all know, except that Gandalf knew all about the back door, as the goblins called the lower gate, where Bilbo lost his buttons. As a matter of fact, it was well known to anybody who was acquainted with this part of the mountains, but it took a wizard to keep his head in the tunnels and guide them in the right direction. They made that gate ages ago, he said, partly for a way of escape if they needed one, partly as a way out into the lands beyond, where they still come in the dark and do great damage. They guard it always, and no one has ever managed to block it up. They will guard it doubly after this, he laughed. All the others laughed too. After all, they had lost a good deal, but they had killed the great goblin and a great many others beside, and they had all escaped, so they might be said to have had the best of it so far. But the wizard called them to their senses. We must be getting on at once now. We are a little rested, he said. They will be out after us in hundreds when night comes, and already shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we have passed. We must be miles on before dusk. There will be a bit of moon if it keeps fine, and that is lucky. Not that they mind the moon much, but it will give us a little light to steer by. Oh yes, he said in answer to more questions from the Hobbit. You lose track of time inside goblin tunnels. Today's Thursday, and it was Monday night or Tuesday morning that we were captured. We have gone miles and miles and come right down through the heart of the mountains, and are now on the other side. Quite a shortcut. But we are not at the point to which our pass would have brought us. We are too far to the north, and have some awkward country ahead. And we are still pretty high up. Let's get on. I am so dreadfully hungry, groaned Bilbo, who was suddenly aware that he had not had a meal since the night before last. Just think of that for a hobbit! His stomach felt all empty and loose, and his legs all wobbly, now that the excitement was over. Can't help it, said Gandalf, unless you like to go back and ask the goblins nicely to let you have your pony back and your luggage. No, thank you, said Bilbo. Very well, then, we must just tighten our belts and trudge on, or we shall be made into supper, and that will be much worse than having none ourselves. As they went on, Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat, but the blackberries were still only in flower, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled a bit of sorrel, and he drank from a small mountain stream that crossed the path, and he ate 3 wild strawberries that he found on its bank, but it was not much good. They went still on and on. The rough path disappeared. The bushes and the long grasses between the boulders, the patches of rabbit-cropped turf, the thyme and sage and the marjoram, and the yellow rock roses all vanished, and they found themselves at the top of a wide, steep slope of fallen stones, the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet. Soon larger bits of split stone went clattering down, and started other pieces below them slithering and rolling. Then lumps of rock were disturbed and bounded off, crashing down with a dust and a noise. Before long the whole slope, above them and below them, seemed on the move, and they were sliding away, huddled all together in fearful confusion of slipping, rattling, cracking slabs and stones. It was the trees at the bottom that saved them. They slid into the edge of a climbing wood of pines that here stood right up the mountain slope from the deeper, darker forests of the valley below. Some caught hold of the trunks and swung themselves into lower branches. Some, like the little Hobbit, got behind a tree to shelter from the onslaught of the rocks. Soon the danger was over, the slide had stopped, and the last faint crashes could be heard as the largest of the disturbed stones went bounding and spinning among the bracken and the pine roots far below. "Well, that has got us on a bit," said Gandalf, "and even goblins tracking us will have a job to come down here quietly." "I dare say," grumbled Bombur, "but they won't find it difficult to send stones bouncing down on our heads." The dwarves and Bilbo were feeling far from happy, and were rubbing their bruised and damaged legs and feet. "Nonsense! We are going to turn aside here, out of the path of the slide. We must be quick! Look at the light!" The sun had long gone behind the mountains. Already the shadows were deepening about them, though far away through the trees and over the black tops of those growing lower down, they could still see the evening lights on the plains beyond. They limped along now as fast as they were able, down the gentle slopes of a pine forest in a slanting path leading steadily southwards. At times they were pushing through a sea of bracken with tall fronds rising right above the hobbit's head. At times they were marching along, quiet as quiet over a floor of pine needles, and all the while the forest gloom got heavier and the forest silence deeper. There was no wind that evening to bring even a sea sighing into the branches of the trees. I think that's probably a good place to stop. There's a bit of a paragraph break here. We're on page 126. So next time we can finish this chapter. Maybe we'll make it a little bit of a shorter one next time. We'll finish up the chapter, which will be another close to 20 pages, not quite 20 pages. And then we'll see where we are at then, and if we want to call it a shorter one, just to get back on the beginning of a chapter for the stream after. So what's everybody saying here? Ticklish business, touch and go? Like a Fozzie joke. Waka waka. Sorrel mushroom? Yeah, I don't think sorrel is a mushroom. I've always thought of it as more of like a scrub, but I'm not certain. A green lettuce-like herb. Don't think we have it here. Much less filling than mushroom. Probably. So, exciting chapters. Bilbo finally reunited with his friends, even if all of them are hungry and a bit grumpy. And interesting to see the loyalties. Bilbo had talked himself into going back into the mountain all by himself. Granted, he does have a magic ring to keep him invisible, but for Bilbo, I feel like that's very brave. Whereas the dwarves, it seemed like at least some of them were all for leaving him behind entirely. But then back on the first hand, I guess, you have Gandalf, who was willing to leave the dwarves to go back for Bilbo by himself. So up to this point, the dwarves, I think, have thought that Bilbo is somewhat of a useless little guy. And maybe now their opinion has gone up a bit. But still, it's not very kind of them to just abandon him to the goblins. especially when you see Bilbo is willing to go back for them. But then again, he might not have got on without them very much, or very well. Yeah, we would probably like sorrel more than mushrooms, Farmos and I. This is also an interesting point that they pointed out that Gandalf specializes in light and flames. That Gandalf has a magical specialty. Um, we knew about the fireworks already, and that it was kind of implied that they might be a bit magical, but they're fireworks. But I find it an interesting point that he has a magical specialty with fire and light. Sorrel more than moral. Wonder if sorrel and strawberry would make the beginnings of a good salad. I could see it. I don't know what sorrel tastes like, if it's bitter or not, but some strawberry would mix up with it. That sounds to me like the description of something that would be in a feast out of a Brian Jacks novel, right? That's Brian Jacks, am I getting the name right, that did Redwall, the Redwall series? I read those a bunch when I was much younger, and even in those books, even though I didn't like mushrooms then, I thought mushrooms were pretty gross, he had a talent for making them sound really delicious. You recently got Redwall to read for the first time. Wow. I'm curious what it will be like to someone who's not in elementary school. Sorrel is supposed to be kind of fruity and tart. Interesting. I'd give it a shot. Might have to wash it first, but but yeah, I'm sure then if you do read Redwall, you'll see what I mean about the feasts. Apparently, from what if I'm remembering correctly, Brian Jacks was. I hope I'm getting the right name. I feel like I'm not certain about that one. Was very careful to describe things, to describe certain things very, I guess, visually. Give them a very thorough description, because I believe he was at one point a janitor in a school where there were some blind students, and so he went into these books wanting to be able to describe things so that they would be enjoyable to these students who couldn't necessarily see, which is a neat note about that writing. I might have some details of that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's how it went. I did find them, I remember being, as a child, shocked by some moments in those books. There are a few moments of violence that caught me quite by surprise at the time. I think that speaking of the descriptiveness of the books, that I was a bit surprised by some descriptions of violence in those books. Got a little ways in and it started feeling straightforward and didn't hold your attention. Okay, I'm glad I got the name right. Although maybe I'm pronouncing the name wrong, the last name, but yeah, I can understand that. And I mean, if you're just reading the very first book, there's lots of those books, and it takes any author some time to find their stride. Though that said, I still do enjoy The Hobbit, but again, it's probably not as straightforward as Redwall is. He does have an interesting way of turning a phrase in this book. I feel like sometimes his sentences feel slightly out of order from how I would normally speak. But I find that also makes it kind of interesting to read. It's interesting that Bilbo, as a very housebound seeming hobbit, knew what he could eat in the wild. I mean, is it? Yes, he likes the comforts of his home, but he also likes food. And I don't think he's. I don't know that he has much of a like what kind of supermarket he's got to go to get his food. I'm sure goes and does some scavenging for himself, and it has been said that he bakes his own cakes, so he knows at least something about food. They seem to live pretty close to nature. Close is maybe an understatement. Underhill goes foraging for fun. Yeah, I wouldn't be too surprised about that. And yeah, I do think that the hobbits as a whole are still a very they have their own sense of civility and what is right and proper, but I think it's probably not improper to go and gather food. Probably read all the cookbooks, 100-mile diet and the like. Yeah, well, he is also very well read. He does like to read, so I wouldn't be too surprised if he's got some encyclopedias, maybe even with illustrations. Although I think maybe by the end of between the end of this book and the beginning of the next one, I wouldn't be surprised if he gathered a great many more books. That is, if he makes it through. I'm not fooling anybody. So yeah, meandering a little bit on the conversation here, but I think there was a lot of good stuff in the past few chapters. The riddle game and glowing swords and goblins chasing through mountains and all that. Anything else stand out to anyone in particular? But it's past 8 o'clock now, so I think this is probably a good place to call the night. I am thinking about whether I want to stick with the Wednesday reading, because it did seem like you missed the riddle game. You can go back; it's up on YouTube right now. I can send you the link if you like. But yes, that is a great scene and absolutely worth going through. Just the whole bit with Gollum in the dark and the lake is the underground lake is just fantastic. But yeah, that's been posted up, and we'll continue on Monday. I was saying I'm not certain if I want to keep doing Wednesdays, because it does seem like Wednesday is the least convenient day for a lot of people, and on Wednesday we didn't have as many people here, so it would also, because I go to Kung Fu on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so that means as it is right now, I've got something at 7 o'clock every single night except for the weekends. So unless people really want to continue the Wednesdays, and we can talk more about it on Monday, what people think about that. But if you've got any opinions on the subject, I'd like to hear them. But yeah, thank you for joining. And yeah, I'm sorry, Izzy, you missed it, but it is posted up, so you can catch up if you like. If you've got some time where you're feeling like you just want to listen to me read about riddles, there are some good ones there. But yeah, happy weekend, everybody. You made it to the weekend. So I hope everyone gets some time to relax. And I'll gotta hear my Gollum. Yeah. I tried to avoid the Andy Serkis impression. It does come out occasionally. When you're hissing and screaming, I think it's hard to avoid some of those sounds. Alright. Well, have a good Friday night. Have a good weekend. And hopefully I'll see you guys on Monday. Bye-bye.